video we're going to look at some of the impacts the terms of trade can have on the different domestic economic goals. First of all, when you're talking about what impact the Australian dollar has on the terms of trade, just be mindful that a change in the dollar, a depreciation or an appreciation, has an uncertain effect on the terms of trade. And it really depends on whether our exports and imports are denominated in foreign currency or not. So what I mean by that, if the dollar was to depreciate, this will lead to an increase in the terms of trade if Australia's exports are denominated in US dollars and imports are denominated in Australian dollars. And if the Australian dollar appreciates, this will lead to a decrease in the terms of trade if our exports are denominated in Australian dollars and imports are denominated in US dollars. So to explain that properly, let's say one Australian dollar was worth $1 US and our exports are selling for $100 US. If suddenly the Australian dollar depreciates and $1 US is equal to 2 Australian dollars, so the US dollar now has twice as much purchasing power. When we export that thing for $100 US, we're now going to receive 200 Australian dollars. So the price we're receiving is actually doubled because our dollar is depreciated. So the price of exports is therefore increased because our exports are denominated in foreign currency, and therefore that's led to a higher terms of trade. But if our imports are denominated in foreign currency, then it's now going to cost us $200 US to buy those imports that used to cost $100. And therefore import prices will be more expensive, and therefore the terms of trade will go down. So just be mindful that there's no clear-cut relationship between the dollar changing and the impact that has on the terms of trade. The other way around, a higher terms of trade will lead to a higher dollar, but you can't state specifically the impact that the change in the dollar will have on the terms of trade. Alright, the terms of trade and the domestic macroeconomic goals. So first of all, a higher terms of trade is really good for the economy. It boosts profits for the mining sector, it increases dividends for shareholders, it increases profit in mining-related industries, so those that are making explosives and engineering and heavy equipment that are supplying to the mines. It led to wage increases for miners, so they were able to spend more money, and that led to things like teachers resigning their jobs in Perth and relocating to the Western Australia. So basically, the economy as a whole got a pay rise. Our purchasing power increased, national incomes increased, and that led to consumption and investment spending booming throughout the economy. And that spurred aggregate demand. So when you're talking about the impact on aggregate demand, the higher commodity prices don't actually change real GDP in the sense that export volumes stay the same. So the quantity doesn't change, it's just the price. So the value of X actually stays the same because there's no increase in quantity. Nominal GDP will increase because that takes into account the increase in price, but real GDP generally doesn't change much. Having said that, the impact that it really has on real GDP is the flow-on effect to consumption and investment components of aggregate demand. So what happens if the commodity prices are higher? That leads to increased investment spending because businesses have an increased incentive to invest because they're more profitable. Consumption spending increases due to the increase in wages or factor income of miners, and this has multiplier effects for other industries. So their increased spending leads to jobs in hotels, bars, jewellery shops. Shareholders make more money. All of that leads to increased employment, and that all flows on to increased aggregate demand, production, and real GDP. So you need to link and boom in the terms of trade to investment and consumption. If it increases because of a lower import prices, then that's going to lead to reduced production costs for firms. Therefore, they will be more willing and able to supply, and that can boost aggregate supply. So it's key to recognise that cheaper imports are great because it reduces the price of production costs and therefore helps to boost our productive capacity. So a higher terms of trade as a result of lower import prices will shift the supply curve to the right, which will eventually help to lower our prices and make us more internationally competitive going forward. In recent times, in 2011 we had a high terms of trade because of the booming Chinese economy, but since 2011 there's been a decline in the terms of trade because of global demand slowing down and increased supply, and that's led to increased unemployment from 5.2% to 6.1% as jobs have been lost because of the lower incomes in the mining sector. Price stability. A higher terms of trade can help reduce inflationary pressures if the higher terms of trade is caused by lower import prices. So Australian importers would then experience cheaper costs of production, which should decrease consumer items and decrease the CPI. If the terms of trade increases because of increased export prices, though, or increased commodity prices, that's likely to lead to increased spending, increased incomes, and potentially demand pull inflationary pressures as national incomes rise. So just be articulate in terms of whether it was caused by higher export prices or higher import prices, because it has a differing effect on price stability. In recent times, in terms of trade has decreased. That's led to, before 2011 it increased, which led to inflation going above our target range. In recent times, the lower commodity prices have helped to reduce inflation because there's been less spending and less investment in the economy. The current account, finally, a higher terms of trade should help to boost the balance of goods and services surplus and reduce the current account. So if the terms of trade increases because of higher export prices, it means we're getting a higher value of exports for any given volume. There's more money coming in for the same volume of exports, and that leads to more credits in the balance of merchandise trade. And we need to remember that we're assuming volumes stay relatively constant because the demand for these commodities is quite inelastic. If the terms of trade increases due to lower import prices, most of these products have an inelastic demand, so again it's going to lead to less debits in the balance of merchandise trade. We'll be importing a relatively similar amount, but because we're doing it at a lower price, the total amount of debits should decrease. So the lower price and similar quantity means there should be less debits in the balance of merchandise trade and net services, reducing the CAD. So again, up until 2011 when we had high commodity prices, that helped to keep the CAD down. Unfortunately, when the terms of trade started to fall and we were getting less export credits, the CAD started to rise above 5%. In recent times, though, because of increased volumes, we've been able to keep the CAD low, despite the fact that our prices have gone down a little bit in terms of commodity prices. Okay, so our high terms of trade stimulated growth up until 2011. Recently, the terms of trade has fallen, mainly due to large supplies and increased investment spending. This has reduced incomes of many export industries, decreased investment, and decreased consumption expenditure. Some of this has been mitigated by the high volumes, but it's not as good as it was during the height of the mining boom. Thank you.